Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is SIYLI's Peacemaker Forum. So glad you can join us. And I'm really very happy tonight to welcome our friend Sharon Salzberg to this web event. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so happy to have you here. So my name's Rich Fernandez. I'm the CEO of the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. And like I said, so happy to be here. At SIYLI, our mission is to enable active practitioners of mindfulness and compassion, in order, so just that. And then for this Peacemaker Forum, our hope is really to be able to address the challenging issues of our times and to promote peace. And so with that, as I've mentioned, so happy to have you here, Sharon. For those of you that don't know, perhaps many of you already know Sharon and her amazing work. She has been a meditation teacher for the last over three decades, has numerous books, beautiful books. The latest book is called Real Love, The Art of Mindful Connection, which is definitely something that's really necessary now, and something I hope we can talk about. And a number of other books, Loving Kindness, Real Happiness, and one of them that I also really especially love is the book entitled Love Your Enemies. And so to be able to engage with you, Sharon, in a dialogue about simply cultivating peace within ourselves and in the world during these turbulent times is really special. So again, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, really.
Yeah. So it does seem like we are in turbulent times, perhaps more so than other times. Do you have any perspectives on that? What is happening and how do we navigate it?
Whoa, that's it. That's the entire evening.
Just that.
Wait a minute. What's happening? Oh. Yeah. It does, of course, seem particularly chaotic and scary. It's a time of a lot of fear. I feel a lot of fear sometimes. I sort of never imagined in my lifetime I would read that, a block and a half from my sublet apartment in New York City, people were painting swastikas on walls. And of course, people in this country have lived under a lot of pressure with a lot of duress and oppression for a very long time. But it feels like it's really moved and spread in a much bigger way. And so many of us who were kind of complacent or, really had to make an effort to understand what other people were going through are suddenly being confronted, pretty vividly with that. And it's like, wow, look at this. And at the same time, there's so much possibility. I think there's so much opportunity. It's kind of this weird juxtaposition of so much consciousness and interest in inclusion and learning how to listen, learning how to live together, for God's sake, with these really violent forces. And they're both happening.
Yeah, they seem to both be emerging at the same time. I think about our SIYLI global community. I'm sure in your mindfulness communities, the folks you teach, there's just an energy and a growing interest in this. And also, speaking of the community, the folks on the phone, I forgot to mention a little housekeeping detail. There is a chat window. And so if you click that, you can send in questions, as they arise for you. Another housekeeping detail, just in terms of the flow for this evening, Sharon and I were thinking to just discuss a few of these topics as related to cultivating peace in troubled times. Sharon's going to offer a brief practice. And then for the second half of the webinar, we really wanted to offer this time to you all who are listening, the participants. So please just send in questions via chat, and I'll do my best to read some of them. And then if some of them are particularly, feel particularly resonant, I'll ask you to just ask Sharon yourself. And then, we could go to you and kind of bring you up on the screen, and then you'll be able to talk to Sharon as well. I'm seeing also on chat, though, that it's a little bit hard for you all to hear me. So I think I'm on max volume, but I will try to speak up. So thank you for that. Okay, so back, Sharon, to the topic. So what are some of the ways that we can navigate this? I think about looking at the news cycle, for example, and it's just gut-wrenching almost every single day. Though it may be the case that our possibilities for being more mindful are rising. Also, it does seem like I get on the spin cycle, I call it, right? And perhaps other people can relate, that it just is so disheartening at times. How do we prevent from falling in despair? And what can we do to practice and exercise the possibility of a different kind of experience?
I think it's on every level, which in a way makes it maximum creativity, is being called for. It's like every level. I think that many people say to me, like right after the election, because I had this book, Real Love, and the third section of the book is about loving all beings. And people would say to me, you must be joking, like, how can you possibly, and I think that demands a real examination of what we mean by love, because I suspect what I mean by love is not, of course, it's definitely not the popular culture, and it may not be what, these people challenging me mean. And I certainly don't mean liking somebody or approving of them or wishing them every success, as they are tormenting others or causing a lot of pain. But it's some sense of recognition that we do live in an interconnected universe, and that the kind of model of self and other and us and them, which is so intense and rigid sometimes, that it's a construct. It can be useful, but it's made up. And that we can't act as though, I can triumph and then vanquish you, and we just go round and round and round and round and round, moving from self and other to more of a sense of we seems to be what's asked for. And it's very hard. Because I also don't think my end goal is not having a civil conversation with somebody with an opposing point of view. I know that there has not been enough of that, and I know that we need to learn to listen to one another and talk to one another. And I also know very deeply that coming from a place of hatred is not a good thing. It's not going to bring a good result, whatever the action is that I decide to take. But I also feel that we need, each of us who feels disillusioned or feels despairing or feels cynical or feels helpless, we need to, get off that couch, and like do something. And for every person, it may be a very different thing they're passionate about. Like I am very, very passionate about people voting. I have been for a long time. And it's not always a popular position, say in the Buddhist community or the mindfulness community. The first time a couple of years ago, before the presidential election, I wrote something about voting, and my assistant said to me, boy, you're losing a lot of followers on Facebook. Did you notice that? And then I started reading the comments, like, I used to think so much more of you. And, now you're asking people to participate in this evil system. And I think, well, look what happened. Right? So at the same time, we are learning to reach out human to human and listen and understand. We have to engage in the process so that we are empowered. And even if it's not about us as individuals, it's about somebody. Somebody is living in such a way that who's in charge makes a huge, huge, huge difference. And we need to honor that. So I think it's everything. It's like every level, finding what you're passionate about, engaging in it. Everything is endless. Nobody gets an instant result. I think of history, and I think of it's almost the illusory nature of history. Like I think about the people in the civil rights movement and what they did. And I always think, well, it was so scary, but they went and did it because they knew it would work. And then I thought, they didn't know it would work. Like, how could you know that? You do it because it's the right thing to do. And you never know if it's going to work. And I thought, look at that. Now that's really courage, But, going back to something I sort of said just casually, it's like not coming from a place of hatred, because I do believe that will destroy us. I don't see how a sustained effort in these kind of times would come from that sort of vitriol. And so I'm also, I'm not like, I haven't watched cable news since before the election.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm on Twitter
Somebody's
like
clapping.
22 hours a day, but
Yeah.
I do. What's
Oh,
going
you're
on.
okay. Okay.
I do. I
Right.
get it all from Twitter. But the when I said right after the election, people were saying, "Are you joking? How could we possibly love everybody, including others?" Now they're saying, "I can't live with myself anymore. I'm angry all the time. I'm full of hatred. I can't bear it anymore. Like I can't stand my own being, my own mind. I need a way not to just be spinning. Spinning. You called it the spin cycle, which we use also just for distraction. But this is, this is spinning around in a really toxic stew over and over and over again.
So then where do we find the love in that, Sharon? So how do we love our quote enemies, as your book title says? How do you love people who are spewing hatred? And there's actually a question here around for loving difficult situations from Emily Janey here about loving difficult situations. How do we do this? Loving difficult situations in people.
I honestly think the hardest thing is wanting to, which means having a different understanding of love. Because it's so stupid, like when I was first thinking about writing this book and I was talking to friends, and I said to one friend, the third section is going to be about loving all beings. And she said to me, "You mean I have to love Stalin?" And I said, "Stalin? Who cares about Stalin anymore? Like, it's a pretty old-fashioned sort of enemy, Like, what? Is that your biggest obstacle to loving all beings? So it's always like very kind of abstract and theoretical. Now it's very real. So and usually I believe really, I mean, this also sounds a little cliched, but it starts with loving ourselves. It's loving something in ourselves that is intact no matter what, and realizing that's within our own hands. That can't be destroyed by somebody else, whatever they do. And then recognizing as I do really believe, the potential that exists within all of us, even the people who are behaving so terribly. And I do feel it's genuine, really, at this point, a kind of compassion for people behaving terribly. Because a few things. I really do believe there's this beautiful line from the Buddha where he said, if you truly loved yourself, you'd never harm another. And I think if people truly love themselves, not just a narcissistic fixation or whatever, but truly love themselves, we would not harm others. We ourselves would not harm others as well. And it comes from that place of such disconnection. And I also believe that as human beings, we are each really capable of greatness, not just mediocrity or getting by or being okay, but truly being great, and to sort of make those choices that are so petty and disconnected, and to live in a way that's so narrow in terms of where you think happiness is when we are capable of so much. I do feel a kind of compassion. But again, you have to really understand what compassion means, because if it means to you giving in and being nice and being sweet, and just saying yes, and then we're really in trouble, because then you won't want to make the effort to find a way.
Yeah, there's some good questions coming through here on chat. So like this last one from Natasha Kasim says, what gets in the way of us loving ourselves?
I think it's just conditioning, I think that there are lots of levels to even just the cultural conditioning that we tend to have in the U.S. in terms of mainstream culture. That there's an effort. There's a certain kind of ethic about being in control all the time that I think we really absorb. And if something goes awry, if you're frightened, if you're sad, if you're sick, if you get older, if you're dying, then it feels like you've lost control and it's like your fault. So there's even a lot of shame attached to all of those. And if someone else is suffering, we're taught, well, let's just put them away somewhere because it's displeasing. It's like a displeasing sight. I don't really want to look at that. It'll bring me down, And so we're taught to divide in times of suffering, to hide our own, to push away others. And instead of that, should be one of the things that really unites us. Like, look at how tender and vulnerable life is. It's so fragile. Shouldn't that be the clarion call to bring us together and have us want to take care of one another? But instead, we're just like in these silos all the time. And so we need to be able to open to the suffering. And we're not even, many of us are not really taught well to open to joy, and just have a good time, for God's sake, and like, don't be so distracted and don't just wait for perfection. I tell a story sometimes. A friend of mine in Washington, D.C. took me to that area where they have all the cherry trees, that blossom at once. And so it's cherry blossom season when they do. And we're standing there, and I was thinking, God, it's so beautiful. This is like exquisite, all these delicate pink blossoms, and there's so many of them, and it's so beautiful. And then my friend said, oh no, it's past the peak. And I thought, oh no, I'm having a bad experience. This isn't good enough anymore. So what are the standards we hold life to? It needs to be perfect, needs to never change, needs to go just the way I want on my timetable. So no wonder, in the end we feel ineffectual and we feel disempowered and we feel so alone, which is the hardest thing.
Mm-hmm. So are there good practices, good ways for us to cultivate these qualities of, inner calm and clarity and peace in these times? And might you lead us in one such practice?
Sure. I mean, I would be so happy to. I mean, that's exactly what meditation practice is, whether you are doing practices that really emphasize mindfulness or really emphasize loving kindness and compassion. They're all kind of in there. So you want to do some practice now?
Yes,
okay.
Please. I think okay. Great. Yeah.
Sure. Why don't we do a mindfulness practice where there's kind of a sneaky element of self-compassion in there. So we'll put that in. Okay. So if you just want to sit comfortably, you can close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. Let your energy settle into your body. If there are sounds in the room or in the street, see if you can just have the sounds wash through you. Bring your attention to wherever you feel the breath most clearly. And this is just the normal, natural breath. Maybe that's the nostrils or the chest or the abdomen. Find that place where the breath is clearest or strongest, and just rest. See if you can feel one breath. If you like, you can use a quiet mental notation of in, out, or rising, falling to help support the awareness of the breath. But very quiet, so your attention is really going to feeling the breath, one breath at a time. And when you find your attention has wandered, you've gotten distracted, lost in thought, or you've fallen asleep, really don't worry about that. What follows is the most important moment. After we've been lost, after we've been gone. Because that's the moment we have the chance to be really different. Instead of judging ourselves or blaming ourselves, feeling like we failed, we can practice some compassion for ourselves. Just gently let go. And with kindness, just bring your attention back to the feeling of the breath. We let go and we begin again. And we let go and we begin again. And if you have to do that a few billion times in the next few minutes, that's fine. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So one other question to share, and then shortly we'll open it up for questions. Is the practice similar to like what we just did? These more contemplative practices, how do they translate into action in the world? How do they support us and help us with action in the world?
I honestly think they're at the core of wise action, because we can act anyway, from whatever's motivating us and with whatever level of skill. We can act as though we're barely aware of what's happening around us. We have such inner compulsion. And that may not be so smart always. I think, first of all, we learn to be present. We learn to listen, and listen not in the sense of just absorb, but really know what's happening. When what it's like we all know what it's like probably. It's like if you go into a meeting and somebody has a really fixed idea of the resolution that has to come out of the meeting, and maybe 50 great ideas are presented and they're never even heard. It's just like, it's got to be that one way. Well, that's how we are a lot of the time, right? We're fixed. We're fixated. And the more we practice, the more we kind of open, and there's a sense of space. And maybe there's a better idea out there, that's going to come around. Or, so when we are lost, and I don't mean just feeling, but lost in anger, in fear. We don't see options, right? It's like if you think about the last time you were really angry at yourself and lost in it. It's not a time we think, you know what? I said that really stupid thing, but I did 5 great things the same morning. Those 5 great things are gone. So we don't actually have the information we need to see. Or maybe there are 5 things we can try at least. Maybe there are some options. Maybe there are some paths right here. So, the more we practice, the more our perspective opens. We can see more clearly what there is. We can begin again, because what I say at this stage of my life is that nothing in life is a straight shot. It's not like, you can say, well, it was a little rough in the beginning. Then I had the great breakthrough experience, and there was never a moment after that it was difficult. It's just not like that. So we're always kind of starting over. And I really think of meditation as like supreme resilience training, to be able to kind of go the long haul and be able to keep starting over and not get so discouraged. And I think it's everything.
Yeah, and it's, because I think about both sides of, we certainly talked about people who have very, very strong negative differing views from you, but there's also the simple sort of pain and suffering you see in everyday life. I live in San Francisco. We have self-driving cars, but we also have a lot of people still living on the streets. Makes no sense to me. And, it's also a cause for despair, just seeing the core suffering of people, in addition to the sort of anger or frustration with things that are playing out in the world as they are. But perhaps in either case, it sounds like this is the sort of grounding practice. This is the field for it's possible to listen deeply, to exercise compassion, and develop equanimity so that we can act. Okay. So we have a few questions coming in through the chat bar. And so what I'd like to do now is open it up. And I'd encourage anyone who's listening to please do send your questions in now, because we're about halfway through and we wanted to dedicate this time to you all who are listening to float your questions. Let's see. One question here is, what are some ways we could describe this practice of equanimity? So how can you practice that on a regular basis? Equanimity being balance, right? What are some of the ways you can practice equanimity? With oneself and others, actually, is where the question goes.
Equanimity is another one of those totally weird words. Like, what in the world does that mean? S.M. Goenka was my first teacher in India, and he used to say all the time, be equanimous, be equanimous, be equanimous. And we used to whisper to one another, what does that mean? I never heard that word before. Did you ever hear that word? But in any form, it's a strange word because it can sound like indifference or coldness or not caring or withdrawing from the world, but it really does mean balance. And it's the kind of balance we want because it's the balance that comes from wisdom. So it means, like, for example, anytime you're engaging in compassion, you want a little wisdom there with you, to remember, I'm not in control of the universe. I can't make you happy. It's not through dint of will that I can make it so. It's not my universe to design, sadly enough. I once said that in a room full of people that I felt if I were in charge of the universe, it would be a much, much better universe. And somebody in the room said, are you sure? And I said, I'm pretty sure, it would be a lot better. But it's not so. It's like the poignancy of life, It doesn't mean we can do nothing, but it means we're not going to have like domination, or absolute control. And so we want that understanding, because otherwise we give up in a nanosecond, How long does it take before we're frustrated and things are too slow and they're not going our way? And, to hang in there for the long haul, we need equanimity. And so we get it. Sometimes it's just reminding yourself, I'm not in charge. There's actually, if you were going to translate the equanimity meditation that goes along with loving kindness meditation. That's basically what you're repeating, you know, in a fancier way with more archaic references, but I'm not in charge. I will do everything I can to try to help you, and I'm not in control. So sometimes we just remind ourselves of that and see if there's a sense of space that can open up. Mindfulness itself will also bring equanimity because we see how much things are changing. We see that they're out of control, that you can't, for example, demand that you not feel what you feel. You know, you can't say, well, I've decided I'm never going to be afraid again. You know, I've grieved long enough. It's over now. Because as conditions come together for something to arise, it will arise. We can be very different in relationship to it right now, but you can't say that's gone. And you remind yourself of that. Don't worry about what's come up. You know, be with it in a different way. You know, find where your power is, in other words, you know, where you're really potent, which is in that relationship to what's going on. We look at change all the time, you know, that brings equanimity. And within change, there are ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs, and things go your way and then they don't go your way. And then, you know, it's just this constant movement and flow. And the more we understand that, the more we have a sense of peace, even as we're traversing, you know, through those ups and downs. So just keep paying attention.
You've mentioned Goenka. And, you know, I know in your tradition, these practices are cultivated in what I would call long format.
Yeah.
Right? Meaning like go away on a retreat and be quiet for 10 days. And then there's like 30-day situations. And then there's the whole monastic life. So one question that always arises, I feel like in our community is like, what's the minimum effective dose of practice? In other words, like, can you cultivate, and this goes to a question Robert Bates here is asking around finding a deep way to practice these qualities. How do we do that in these crazy busy times, right? Like, how much time do we need to dedicate to this? I know some of the answers to this for myself, but I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this.
Well, I mean, in the historical sweep, Goenka himself really represented a late tradition because his teacher was not a monastic. He was not a monastic. Goenka's whole thing was sit a 10-day retreat every year and sit an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. And, you know, we might say, oh, that's extreme. I've only got 5 minutes. But, you know, nonetheless, compared to, you know, the lineage, it's a real it's real advocacy for being in the world and living a lay life and yet having very authentic and deep practice. And in the Mahasi Sayadaw lineage in Burmese Buddhism, even though he was a monastic, his whole thing in a way was it was kind of returning the idea of real liberation to lay people. And you might go spend, say, 3 months at a retreat center, but not every year, or not every three months. You don't renew forever. You know, it's like an immersion. You decide, oh, I'm going to go to graduate school for 18 years and nobody blinks, you know. But you say, oh, I'm going to spend 3 months in the monastery. It's like, oh, my God.
Fair enough.
So, yeah. I do believe that daily practice, and this is sort of my Goenka conditioning since he was my first teacher, daily practice is the key. And the more we live in a time where people often ask, what's the least amount of time I can put into this and get my brain to change, you know? And I don't know, first of all, that it's that healthy to think about what's the least amount I can offer, you know, or give and get everything I want in return. Which is kind of typical of something. But someone once said to me, not very charmingly, they said, this was in a class, they said, well, a lot of younger teachers than you, like in your dotage over there, a lot of younger teachers than you teach that you don't have to meditate at all formally. You don't have to sit even those 10 minutes a day. You can just be mindful, like cooking and walking, and why can't you do that? And I said, for my dotage, you know, I said, I think you can do that. And I've had teachers who did that. I've known people who did that. But you really have to do it. you can't just tell a nice story. There were women I knew, they weren't actually particularly my own teachers, but they were teachers, Bengali women who maybe were often in arranged marriages in those days. And one in particular I was thinking of that, had a very tyrannical set of in-laws who wouldn't let her go to do retreats, wouldn't let her practice. And she became a teacher, and people would say to her, "How did you do that?" And she said, "I was very mindful stirring the rice." But I knew the difference between her and me was that she really was mindful stirring the rice. And that for me, I'd say, yeah, you can be mindful doing anything. So to make it real is the hardest thing, and it's the most important thing. And for me to make it real means to practice every day.
Great, thank you. Stirring the rice. So a couple of questions. One to do with compassion, and really it's about, the question is phrased as the balance between finding compassion for others and being taken for granted. And maybe can you speak to that, or let's say that formulation actually?
Well, I would look at your own motivation, like if you're about to say yes upon being asked something, what's cooking inside? Do you actually feel resentful? Do you feel generous? Do you feel, Jesus, no one ever, does that for me? Or, pay attention, because that's your feedback system, is your motivation. And if you're about to say yes when you're really, wishing you could say no, and it's not coming from a very good place, maybe say, I have a friend who said she learned how to say, "I'll have to get back to you on that." She couldn't bring herself to say no right away, but feeling certain clues, she would say, "I have to get back to you on that." And then she'd say no a little later on. So keep a real good eye on what's motivating you.
Okay, good, thank you. Maybe related, there's also a question coming in actually from a question about a high school leadership team group of folks who are, activists for social change. And really, the question is around how can they be the most compassionate and effective teen leaders to facilitate other teens, which from the question, it sounds like, further into the question, it sounds like it's challenging because there's often like distraction or outright disrespect for what they're trying to do. So how can they engage, with other teens who are acting in this way when their hope is to simply be peacemakers and hold a safe space to learn and grow for them and their peers?
Well, now I'm curious, why are the other teens there? Are they under duress? Do they have a choice? Or?
It's not clear to me. So yeah, it sounds like, in facilitating other teens, there's often, disrespect, and even when sort of rules are shared or, ground rules and so forth, there's just hard to engage other teens. And
it is hard. It's life. But I think communication is such an interesting thing, isn't it? Really being clear, having clear expectations, being very specific, and being able to describe your own experience. Like, I'm just, I have 15 minutes to now deliver half an hour worth of information. So I need, I need this, whatever it is, to stop and let's just finish up here, something like that. But, there's a certain sense of being part of a whole, being part of a team oneself. And that is a kind of leadership that is really important. And it's, it's recognizing that we can find ourselves in one another. There's a part of all of us that's that teen that is wanting to be different or needing to be different or not going along with the flow or something like that. And and just hanging in there with that part of us and them. And but I believe in structure and clear expectations, and just keep laying it out. This is what it is. This is what being here entails. Because otherwise I think it's not fair to people. There's always that shifting, like, kind of vague thing. And just keep, being very clear about it, I think, is actually a compassionate act. And so I would just go with that.
Yeah, in similar fashion, getting this one question coming in here is also about how do we get this to our leaders, right? So is there a way that we can actually transmit this to our leaders? What's a skillful way to think about offering this to leaders, if that's the right construct?
Well, I mean, leadership also goes from the ground up, right? And I mean, one of the things that is crazy making in this time is just a lack of honesty and a lack of clear communication. And there's something so amazing when somebody just says, this is how things are, or, I get confused when I hear you say this because this is what the data shows, and all of this can be done without demonizing somebody or vilifying somebody. But it's such a relief to me every time I hear that. Somebody, whoever they are, could be in a town hall, somebody's asking a question, or somebody points out, well, the consequences of that legislation are that I'm going to lose my health insurance or whatever, and how can that be deemed right? And just putting it out there that I think it does sort of filter up, and I think that there are a lot of people who want to be good leaders, who want to really be acting well, in this time. And
what about those that don't?
And there are plenty who don't,
like that are purposefully want to game it and just kind of drive their agenda. Like what's to be done with this? How do we relate to that?
Well, then I come back to the dynamics of power, which is, what I was sort of saying before. It's like my ultimate goal is not just to sit down with somebody and have a nice lunch who I feel is really, gaming the system and trying to hurt people, or is so disconnected that it's not going to be the case that we say, well, we disagree on a few things. But I was writing something about kind of civil communications and reaching out and loving kindness, and I ended it with a question, because it's part one of two parts. I ended it with the question about, what about when they're waving Nazi flags, and they're screaming slogans about Jews, and and I said I have enough inherited trauma so that this is not a detached observation for me. It's like, whoa, but then what? Because that's the reality. Or if I were a person of color in this society, there would have been a very clear reality that may have been hidden from other people, but that's the reality. It's threatening, it's scary, it's dangerous, because it is dangerous. And so to be able to do both, engage in the levers of power in the ways that we can participate in, and make sure you do. And vote. That's my obsession. And at the same time, every time we come from a place of hatred, it's self-destructive. I really do believe that, and it's ineffectual. It's not gonna last. It's like, who can swim in those waters forever, And so being able to find those other places inside of us where we have strength and we have the ability, we have energy. We have the ability to go on from those places. I think we just have to do it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I have another question, and this one perhaps is a little bit more, I would say, almost internal to our community. right? Which is how can we extend beyond our community? So, maybe folks on this call have an interest in mindfulness or are meditators, but how do we actually extend beyond that? Actually, this was spurred from a question that came in about how do we offer this to underprivileged, perhaps underserved communities? And how do we do that, right? Like it's, in some ways, I don't know who's on the call, but, in some ways, just having the technology to be on the call is a privilege, right? And so how do we extend beyond that? What's a skillful, what's a caring and compassionate way to do this?
Well, I mean, I think especially if you are, if you feel like you're trained in these modalities enough so that you can offer them to others in a good way, it's not hard to find, and it's so different now than even a few years ago. I mean, I've done guided meditations just as one example. It's just me, like I did a set of guided meditations for this nonprofit that go out on people's text service because they're for people who don't have smartphones. Right. And so the first program this nonprofit did was English as a second language for farm workers in California. Soon after that, I did a stress reduction program, which was translated into Spanish. And they were looking for someone to translate into Farsi, and, I mean, it's not just for people who have Apple, and Apple Watches or, whatever. Because there are people who are so committed that they've already started laying in the infrastructure for this to be available for people who are interested in it. And, I've taught domestic workers also online, and that was translated into Spanish. It takes some exploration, because we live so siloed, no doubt. But and there's a huge amount of international work. I see, even names in this chat room, people who are doing that. There's a lot that's happening if you're moved, and it's kind of an amazing time in that way, especially for somebody my age, because of course I remember the old days. My friends say it's like, you're the kind of person, it's like you're saying, oh, when I went to school, I had to walk a mile in the snow without any shoes. It's like when I came back from India, nobody knew what the word mindfulness was. And you said you were a meditation teacher. You were like a complete weirdo. It's so different now. You can definitely find a way if you're motivated.
Yeah, thank you. That's very inspiring. The intentionality about this that we can bring to this work really is the bridge. So thank you. And thanks for sharing those examples. It's really helpful to hear the concrete examples as well. And I'm sure many people on this call are also involved in such work. So thank you for the question. Thank you for sharing that perspective. All right, so we've got like 10 minutes left. So this is the time, you all. So if you have a question for Sharon, I would please encourage you to type it into chat. I'm definitely sorting them as they come in. But right now I don't see any fresh questions. Sharon, as you reflect on this meeting itself, like the intention of having a Peacemaker Forum of this kind, any thoughts to share, any just reflections, observations? Here we are, we're doing this, right? There's people from all over the world on this call.
That's right. I just lost you for a moment. It's kind of an interesting technological moment, but now you're back. I'm not thinking. I even love the term peacemaker. I love the word. So glad to see that you were calling this out. I mean, is that my siren that we hear, or do you hear it? Yeah. I'm in New York City. Yeah. And what an incredible time. And I mean, we will do a lot by virtue of community that, we just couldn't imagine being able to do sitting at home and thinking, oh my God, things are really bad.
Yeah, exactly. I love this question that just came in. Thank you, Brandon. He said works, yeah, and a few other ones coming in here. But here's one really cool question. If you could say one thing to the president, what would it be?
That wouldn't be like.
That's sorry, the president of the United States, because
Yeah, no, I
again,
get
this
that.
is all, you know. So that person, what would you say?
Maybe be peaceful. I actually do have a level of compassion. I don't know exactly how I'd express it. Some loving kindness form of something, but at the same time, if I had the means to have him perhaps not have that kind of power or influence over the lives of others, I would take that too, you know.
So you would offer loving kindness.
Yeah, I mean, just in a certain sense of like, wow, what a mind, or what a, you know, what an existence. It's like when I was, it might have been less when I was in San Francisco, actually. I was teaching, I was at this panel, and somebody in the audience said, you know, what's really hard for me, he said, I know when I hurt others, when I act really badly, I know, I can see I'm coming from a place of pain. So he said, I'm assuming it's that way too for like people in power. But he said, but they don't look like they're in pain. They look incredibly self-satisfied and content with their lot in life and lording it over everyone else. And he said, how do I fix that? Like, how do I, you know, get to the place of believing that they're coming from pain? And no one on the panel said a word, so it was like me. And I said, well, I agree. I said, it's so frustrating. Sometimes I look at them and I think, if you could just show it a little bit, you know, there must be pain in there. Like, just if they could just crack that veneer of self-righteousness or self-satisfaction, it would be so much easier to respond and say, wow, you are in pain. And I said, but they're not showing it. And I know it's hard, but I know it's there. I really do believe that those kind of actions come from a place of such disconnection. It's its own special kind of pain. And I would try to respond to that.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Sharon. So just a couple of more things here. By the way, there's a note in from Fiona in Australia saying, loving hearing those New York sirens. I'm here in rural Australia. So kudos to that. And then actually we have a question that one of the participants would themselves like to ask you. So they have their hand raised. This is Rui. And I'm just trying to find you, Rui, and unmuting you. So please go ahead.
I just unmuted them.
Great. Go ahead, Rui.
Good morning. Good morning
Hey.
from Shanghai. I'm Rui. I had an emotional intelligence course last year in November here with Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, and I've been doing. The question is related to the practice of meditation in itself, and I've been doing for 4 or 5 months daily. Like I choose this time that is I'm doing like 12 minutes per day, and once per day, and I'm feeling comfortable with it. And I would like to ask you, Sharon, if a person is feeling comfortable doing this time of meditation, meditating this time per day, do you think that this is enough, or we could improve doing more time per day?
I think you could do some more time per day. It doesn't even have to be so much more. But I think there's two things. One is maybe you could do 2 sessions a day, you know, of that length, for example. And in between, there's a kind of practice we call short moments many times, which is like just try to interject in ordinary activity, just a few breaths or 1 minute of meditation. Sometimes people who work, say, in business, they'll write it in their calendar 1 minute before the meeting. they'll just sit and breathe, very brief periods, but a few of them throughout the day, and you kind of intersperse them throughout the day, and it also makes a big difference.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Sorry. The other question is just a tactical question about this, a recording of this. Yes, a recording of this is being made, and we will be sharing this. So this will go out, via our list, as well as it will be posted on our Facebook page. So, you should be able to access this and share it as well. And please do. We really are trying to offer this freely and as widely as we can. So thank you for that. And then one last question I'll share from Julie Matsumoto. How can one help someone in a leadership position to see that an action they've taken or are thinking of taking is coming from a place of fear?
I probably would personally reframe that, because it would be a little hard to say really where they're coming from. I mean, we can have a good intuition, or we might be very sensitive to these things, but really what we see is their action, not their intention, or not their motivation. And the most honest and vulnerable, if it's appropriate in a certain relationship, communication we can have is describing our own experience. Which is not so much like when I saw you coming from a place of fear, then I realized, we need to have this conversation. But more when I was in the room when you yelled at that person and I saw that, I felt mortified. They felt mortified. It was like, everyone feels like they're walking on eggshells. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. I don't know what to say to you. I know this came at a time right after your new promotion and you were in uncharted waters, but I don't know what to do with all these people I'm now responsible for who are freaking out. Whatever, that's just a communication. And because there's something I think that brings up, few things bring up more resistance than being told where we're coming from by somebody else. And even though it may be accurate, maybe it's even more resistance when it is accurate. But I just don't see that it actually is going to work.
Okay. So connecting again, with one's inner sort of peace, inner understanding, and then sharing that. A lovely note here from Nausicaa. A very sincere thank you for connecting with people in the whole world to share compassion, peace, kindness, wisdom, emotions, and mindfulness. On behalf of all the participants, Sharon, a sincere, deep thank you and appreciation. Perhaps we can just close with one of those very short practices, if you wouldn't mind just leading us
that
here.
would be so lovely. Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
So please.
So once again, if you want to just sit comfortably. And I would say, with whatever words or phrases come to mind, you can offer to yourself some well wishes. It's gift giving or generosity of the spirit. May I be peaceful. May I be happy. May I know the power of love. Confident that resolve within will affect the world we meet and the world we create outside. And so really fill oneself with energy.
So beautiful. Thank you so much, Sharon.
Thank you.
And thank you all. Thank you all so much for being peacemakers until we meet. So thank you, and have a good evening, good day, good morning. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.